If you're like most Americans today, you may be wondering, who on earth is Tim Waltz? Well, find out today as I'm joined by my special guest, Dan Pilla. I'm Drenda, and this is Drenda on Guard. Let's get into it. Today, my special guest and I will be diving into everything you need to know about Kamala Harris's VP pick, Tim Waltz. But before we get started, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel. It's free. It helps us reach more people with the truth, and you can change your mind at any time. Now, today we have a special guest who's a dear friend to Gary and myself for many years. You may know him as America's tax expert, Dan Pilla, but he's also an incredibly knowledgeable writer, as evidenced by his many articles, one of which we'll be talking about today from the National Review. And without further ado, Dan, welcome to the program. So great to have you.
It's my pleasure, Drenda. How are you? It's great to see you again.
You're a hot topic lately because Tim Waltz is in the news. People are asking you. You wrote a great article in the National Review. I like this. You said last week during a Democratic fundraiser here in Minnesota, Minnesota Governor Tim Waltz stated that one person's socialism is another person's neighborliness. What about that? Is socialism
it's a
just
bizarre
neighborliness?
statement, Drenda, and what it does is it betrays one of two things about Tim Waltz. Is he number one is he's either profoundly ignorant about what socialism is. That's a possibility, or secondly, this is just another one of the many lies in the long train of lies that the leftists use to try to convince the American people that socialism is somehow some benign economic system that is only concerned about equity and welfare of the people, and it's concerned about nothing else. Now, that, of course, is an absolute lie. That's not at all what socialism is. And so for Waltz to say one person's socialism is another person's neighborliness, it completely defies, as I said, understanding what socialism is. Socialism is an economic system, Drenda, that's under which the state controls all essential elements of economic activity. And when I say essential elements of economic activity, I'm talking about the three key elements of economic activity that go on in a marketplace. That's production, distribution, and exchange of goods and services. Under socialism, the state usurps control of all three of those elements: production, distribution, and exchange of goods and services. So there is no free market. There is no freedom of individuals in a socialist system to buy and sell, to produce or not produce based on their own needs and based on the needs of the marketplace. Furthermore, under socialism, workers do not have the freedom of choice to go out and work for this company or that company, to negotiate their wages, to negotiate their raises, etc. Under a socialist system, the labor force is also usurped by the state and controlled by the state. So in a very real way, Drenda, a socialist system amounts to nothing more than abject slavery, only the slave master this time is not the plantation owner. The slave master is the state itself. And what they do is they cast this system in the context of equality. All right, they try to tell us that, well, it's a system under which everybody's equal, and that's true. Everybody's equally destitute, equally oppressed, and equally poor under a socialist system, with the exception of the top 2 or 3% of the ruling class.
Right. And the elitists.
Go ahead. You go ahead.
No, the elitists, right? They're the ones that end up. They're the only ones that benefit, and they become the little gods that rule and reign in everybody's life. And it's being pushed as equality, like you said, diversity, inclusion, and many times it makes people, especially in minority groups, think, oh, good, there would be utopia. We would have equality. Not true, right? Has it worked anywhere?
Right. Well, again, there is equality. Everybody's equally destitute.
Poor.
but you know, when they say, well, they redistribute wealth so that it's distributed equally. Well, that's true. The wealth is controlled by the top 2 or 3% of the unelected bureaucrats that run the state, and the rest of the 97 or 98% of the masses are equally destitute. This is what we have to understand about socialism. There is no example in the history of the world, for as long as socialism has been an economic model that's been used in the world for roughly 150 plus or minus 150 years. There is no example where socialism has made the condition of the masses better. In every situation, without example, or without exception rather, the example has been to reduce the masses to abject poverty. And there's no better example of this than Venezuela, Drenda. In the 1990s, Venezuela was the richest country in South America. As a matter of fact, we were, when I say we, there were certain conservative think tank elements in the United States that were studying Venezuela's Social Security model because it had such a great benefit for the retirees under that program. It was largely a privately owned, privately controlled retirement model. And we were looking at that in this country saying, maybe we need to revise our Social Security program to more match Venezuela's. Well, then along came the socialists and they start complaining about income inequality and income distribution, and talking about the idea that we have to redistribute the wealth from those that have to those who don't have. And what they did is they destroyed that country. In 15 years, that country went from the richest to the poorest, one of the poorest nations in the world. And not just the Americas, but the world. They completely destroyed the economy of that nation under socialism.
Wow. And you live in Minneapolis area, so you've seen what Tim Waltz did to Minneapolis and to your state. So let's talk about Minnesota and Tim Walz's policies, what things look like before he came into office, just like Venezuela, and what things look like now.
Well, yeah, Tim Waltz took office. He's in his second term here now, and when he first took office, Drenda, he did not have complete control. The Democrats, let me put it that way, the Democrats in this state did not have total control of the state House and the state Senate. We have a bicameral legislature, so we have a House and a Senate, just like the United States House of Representatives and U.S. Senate. Our state program, our state legislature is modeled the same way. So you got to have bills that pass both the House and the Senate, and then they are signed into law by the governor. When Governor Walz first took control in the state of Minnesota as governor, he did not have control of the House and the Senate. And so his various programs of spending and taxation were not enacted. In 2023 and 2024, Walz, or I should say the Democrat Party, controlled both the House and the Senate. They had a 1-seat majority in the Senate, about a 6 or 7-seat majority in the House. So now we've got complete control of state government. 100% of state government is controlled by Democrats, and I would say leftist Democrats, because that's what Walz is. And there's just no question about it. So since he took office, Drenda, there have been substantial spending increases. For example, the state of Minnesota in 2023 had a budget surplus. This is a budget surplus, Drenda, of $18 billion. All right. Now, Walz didn't give any of that money back to the taxpayers. There was some of that money that was just distributed in the form of quote unquote welfare payments. I call them welfare payments. He called them rebates, but it was given to the lowest economic spectrum in the state, which are the people who didn't pay the taxes in the first place, right? It's only the income earners that pay the taxes. So the income earners are the ones that created the $18 billion surplus. He didn't give any of that money back to those people. Instead, after giving back roughly $1 billion of that money, he spent the rest of it. So our budget increased remarkably from plus or minus $55 billion. This is the biannual budget, to over $76 billion, Drenda. This is a remarkable increase in spending. And this now it's one thing to spend the money. All right. You got an extra $100 in your pocket. It's one thing to go and spend the money, right? He could have spent that money on infrastructure. He could have spent it on roads and bridges. Right. He could have spent it on buildings. He could have spent it on things that are permanent assets, but that's not what he did. He created more welfare programs. He created programs that have to be funded into the future. So now the state of Minnesota is looking at an ongoing budget demands that require this kind of substantial taxation in order to support this spending. It is remarkably destructive what he did in this state. And to make matters worse, now this is in the face of an $18 billion budget And this is in the face of Walz's promise, like the Biden administration made the promise, that they're only going to tax the rich. They're not going to tax middle income or low income people. Well, that's exactly the opposite of what he did in the state of Minnesota, because he raised both taxes and fees on vehicle registration and gasoline taxes. So all vehicle expenses and all transportation expenses in the state of Minnesota have been increased significantly. And to make matters worse, Walz took our gas tax in this state and indexed it for inflation. So in other words, every single year, there's going to be an automatic increase in the gas tax in the state of Minnesota going forward. So this is the Walz legacy, Drenda. It's remarkable fiscal irresponsibility. Now, to top that off, as if all that's not enough, the state of Minnesota is the proud owner of what we have come to call the food fraud scandal. All right, there's an organization in the state of Minnesota called Feeding Our Future. And Feeding Our Future was operated under the Minnesota Department of Education as well as the federal government. And they were taking money from taxpayers, supposedly using that money to feed children across the state of Minnesota. And that program really ramped up during COVID because, we got to feed the kids during COVID, right? $250 million, Drenda, $250 million was siphoned off of federal and state taxpayers and funneled into this Feeding Our Future program, which then distributed it down through dozens of shell corporations, and not one child in the state of Minnesota was fed. Not one child. And all of this happened under the watch of Governor Walz, and under the watch of the Walz director of education, who just resigned. When this thing hit, when this thing hit, and it was disclosed that this massive fraud was going on, she just resigned her job and walked away. Nobody in the Walz administration has so much as apologized for the food fraud scandal, and nobody in the Walz administration, including the governor himself, has ever stepped up and offered any kind of explanation as to how a $250 million fraud program could be operated right under their noses.
Incredible. And meanwhile, no child was helped. No child was fed. The Democrats are amazing at this.
Was fed.
They launder money through all these supposed NGOs that are so, they pull on your heartstrings. They're going to take care of children, and yet children end up starving because they lie and they launder the money to evil. And now, so you started with a surplus, and now you have a deficit.
Yeah, and it's gone. Every dime was gone. But Drenda, they were claiming to be feeding more children per day than even exist, that are alive in the state of Minnesota. I mean, the claims were so bizarre, it was unbelievable. Now, there were a lot of indictments. Many indictments came down, and they were federal indictments. And of course, the FBI got involved in it, and they did a detailed investigation. And about 40 or 50 individuals that were involved in this program were charged with felony offenses. Of course, a great number of them fled, and most of the people, almost all of the people that were involved with this were Somalis, and so a lot of them took the money and just left the country. But during the course of the trial, this is bizarre, because during the course of the trial, one of the defenses that one of the defendants made in response to the FBI's claim that there was no evidence anywhere that one child was fed is they were arguing that, well, the FBI didn't follow us around in every single place, and they never saw us, listen to this now, they never saw us not feeding kids. And so because they didn't see us not feeding kids, how do they know that we didn't feed kids? Well, of course, there was no proof that a single child got a meal out of this Feeding Our Future program. I'll tell you what, it's unbelievable. And the sorriest part of this whole story is the fact that Walz has not stepped up and so much as apologized for what happened with that $250 million worth of taxpayer money.
Wow, so incredible.
Now to top it off, one of the things that came out of the $18 billion spending spree was a $100 million homeless program that the state of Minnesota started. And it's patterned after the California homeless program. Now, you might know a little bit about the California homeless program, where Gavin Newsome Gavin Newsome appropriated $24 billion to help homeless people in the state of California, which would be enough money to give about $180,000 to every homeless person in the country. All right, you can buy a decent condo for that. But the $24 billion that was spent in California, Drenda, they can't account for a single dollar of that money. Wow. The California authorities cannot account for a single dollar of that money. And now Governor Walz, who wants to be just like Gavin Newsome and just like California, has instituted the same program in the state of Minnesota, smaller scale, of course, because we don't have 60 million people. We only got 5.5 million people here. But it's the same type of program that I will bet you anything is going to end up exactly the same way. That is to say, they won't be able to account for a single dollar of that 100 million that's been appropriated to homeless programs here in the state of Minnesota.
Dan, this is just, and when you go to California, you'll see how badly this homeless program is working. You see people living on the streets. They're defecating on the streets. They're wearing no clothing. There's tents and little shelters made out of cardboard everywhere. It's the most horrific thing. And now I hear with the hypocrisy of Gavin Newsom saying things like, we need to stop this homelessness and fix this. Like all of a sudden he's now a conservative when the election time comes. That's the game the Democrats play. That is so infuriating, is they go far, far left with all their crazy agendas. They launder money from the poor. They say they're doing all these great things that they're lying about. Every city they run is imploding right now in America. Look at Cleveland, look at Detroit, it's incredible. The cities they're running are in destruction. And that's typical of them. While they say they're helping the poor, then at election time they become conservatives.
Right. And so we ask ourselves, well, why is that happening? Can't they see it? And the answer, Drenda, is they can see it. They do know what's going on. Yes. They do understand that their policies are destroying the middle class, and that's what they want. Right. Yes. Socialism requires the destruction of the middle class. Remember, socialist economies operate under the premise that the state owns all aspects of the economic activities that go on in the marketplace. All right, they own the production, the distribution, and the exchange of all goods and services. All right, that can only happen with the destruction of the middle class and the creation of dependence by the people on the government. That's how socialist programs work. They create the economic problems, they create the social problems, they create all the turmoil that goes on in society, and then they step in with a government program to promise to fix it. Well, the government program, all that does is create more dependence by the people on the state to further consolidate the socialist control. That's what they're talking about. And this is part of the evil of Walz's statement that one man's socialism is another man's neighborliness. All right, those two ideas can't be more mutually exclusive. All right, we talked about socialism being slavery. Neighborliness involves the voluntary participation of individuals freely helping one another out of the goodness of their hearts because they want to make the world a better place.
Which comes back to Christianity, as far as I'm concerned, Dan. You know, socialism seeks to be God, make government God, and remove God from society. Christianity and free enterprise says, no, let a man work with his own two hands, produce something, and then that he may have something to give. And that's where then the church becomes the agent of helping people, doing good deeds, one-on-one, not a government. We know anytime the government runs anything, like the Postal Service, it's a disaster, right? And so giving or like healthcare or anything else, let the government take the money and the people will never see the benefit. Let an individual work with their own two hands, create something, and then give to others and bring them into the kingdom of God, and we see people's lives transform. So this is satanic. As far as I'm concerned, socialism is just the front door to communism. It's a satanic system built on trying to make a controlling government God and a very few elitists to be gods, and to remove God. And when we look at Tim Waltz, Dan, his history, you talk about that in your article. Peter Schweitzer said it as well in his book. Tim Waltz has connections 3 decades ago to communism, to China, visits to China. So he has socialist, communist roots.
Oh yeah, no question about it. Waltz honeymooned in China. He's been to China 30 times over the years, Drenda.
Wow.
I don't know what he was doing in China 30 times. Maybe he loved the country and just likes to visit the Great Wall. I don't know. I've no idea. I have no inside information as to what was going on. But I find it a little curious that Walls it embraces this socialism to the point where you have to believe that he completely bought into the Chinese socialist model. And I think it bears stating, you alluded to this, the idea that communism and socialism, are the same thing. We can put it this way. You take totalitarian government generally, and it breaks down into basically three branches. You got fascism, communism, socialism. Fascism, communism, socialism are three leaves on the same branch. All right, they're not different types of government.
Right.
They're three leaves growing on the same stem. And the stem is totalitarian government, where individuals have no freedom and they have no rights, particularly no right of conscience. They can't freely worship, because the first thing that totalitarian governments do, Drenda, is try to stamp out Christianity as best they can, because they want people dependent on the state for their daily bread and not dependent on the Creator for their daily bread, as Jesus told us to do. And so this is what they're all about, is creating that dependence on the state.
I agree completely. And we've never seen it work anywhere. And it didn't work in Minneapolis either. Tim Waltz came into office with a $18 billion budget surplus, and now you have a deficit. He managed to do that.
Well, under the state constitution, Drenda, we are not allowed to operate under a deficit. There has to be a balanced budget in the state of Minnesota. Now, that's a good news, bad news thing. The good news is we have to have a balanced budget. The bad news is the only way they balance the budget is with tax increases. That's the problem.
You've seen tax increase. Yeah.
So I mean, these spending programs that Walls created have to be funded year after year after year into the future indefinitely. And that's the difference between creating a quote unquote program and using the money for infrastructure. You buy a bridge, that bridge is good for 50 years, 100 years, right?
Right.
You create a social program, and that social program needs to be funded year after year after year. And if history tells us anything, it tells us that the social programs only grow because it is in the interest of the socialist state to create dependence, so more and more people are brought into this program under the umbrella and quote unquote helped in one way or another. So the programs only grow, the costs only get greater.
Wow. And meanwhile, the poor, the hurting, the legal immigrant, they're promised a bright future if they'll vote for a Kamala Harris and a Tim Walz,
right.
When in fact they are prostituting the poor for their own pockets. They are using that.
No
and
question
instead
about
of putting in places what you said about investing, instead of investing in structure that's going to be an investment that gives a return, instead they just launder the money and really quash the poor, hurt the poor. In the end, it's like telling someone who's poor, you need an expensive pair of tennis shoes versus owning a home. It's like the tennis shoes are gone in no time, but the home is something that could be a growing investment. So we see more and more people that do not own homes, who do not have good jobs, livelihood, they don't have, and taxes just keep increasing, which hurts the poor as well that are trying to get out of poverty, trying to work a job. They tax their tips, they tax their everything they possibly can. Taxing gas hurts the poor too. How do you get to the job, or how do you ever own a car? How do you drive? All these things end up hurting the poor, but the rich get richer at the very, very top of these socialist elitist groups. So, are you voting for Tim Walz in the fall?
I will not be voting for Tim Walz. Now, the other thing is this: in the state of Minnesota, there was a study that was just released. I believe the Tax Foundation did it, and it was also promulgated pretty heavily by the Center of the American Experiment, which is a Minnesota think tank. They're based right here in Minneapolis. They do excellent work on state policy issues and issues of liberty and free market economics here in the state of Minnesota. A very, very solid organization, and they have noted that Minnesota is I believe it's the 5th worst state in the nation now, Drenda, for out-migration of high-income citizens. And what I mean by that is we've got more people leaving the state than are coming into the state that are income earners. So we are losing, because of these programs, we are losing our tax base on an ongoing basis.
Which
People
will
are
hurt the
voting with their
poor
feet in
even
this.
more. But that will hurt the poor even more.
Oh, no question
When
about
people
it.
have finances, pay taxes, move out of the state, jobs go with it, taxes go with it, everything that would actually truly help those, in their state that need help, you're gonna, it's a destruction. It's imploding. Why are they imploding our cities? Why are they doing this? Isn't this an overall agenda to destroy America and to truly bring us into socialism? You have to weaken the greatest nation in the world.
Yeah, that's my hypothesis, Drenda. They know exactly what they're doing. This is not an accident. They are deliberately creating social chaos so that the state can come in with its state-sanctioned, quote unquote, solutions. And those solutions involve the destruction of the free market and the destruction of individual liberty, and in particular, the destruction of Christianity.
Yes. Every year, pretty much, I get to go to Canada at least once, maybe 2 or 3 times. I always see Canada ahead, stepping down the road. They were there with transitioning kids. I saw, oh, this is why Obama, Hillary, why they want socialized medicine to pay for these surgeries for kids, right? And you see it. Well, I was just in Canada, and you could barely find meat, especially beef, in the stores. And I'm going there, I think, I've got a lot of family, I want to buy a roast. I had to buy 3 of these dinkiest little roasts, and the cost to buy food, we think our inflation's high and our grocery store prices are high. Wow. And so this push that nobody will eat meat while they're destroying everything, and you can always see steps ahead. Canada, the cost of living up there is astronomical, eating out's astronomical, the taxes are astronomical, and there's very little meat in the store. And that is where they're trying to take us. I believe it's a shocking thing. You can't find people even to do work there because they've regulated things at such a high level. Nobody even wants to work. They just take government money and live in this poverty that's disgusting. Welfare.
Well, you made a comment that triggered my memory here a little bit, and that was about Canada and transitioning kids. One of the other things that Governor Waltz did is he made Minnesota a sanctuary state for children transitioning their gender. So if there's a child, let's say pick a state, Oklahoma, and that child wants to transition and their parents don't support them, that child can literally, we're talking about children under 18 years of age, Drenda. We're talking about 15, 14-year-old kids. If they can get somebody to take them to the state of Minnesota, the state of Minnesota now will legally protect that kid from his parents.
Wow. And
allow that kid to transition his gender in the Minnesota healthcare system without any influence or protection or even the consent of the parents. So this is an evil policy.
It is evil, and that's paid for by government tax dollars by the people.
Yeah, no question. It's pretty sad.
It's disgusting. It's safe to say, I believe that Governor Tim Waltz is just as, if not more, liberal, left, extreme as Kamala. And why would they put, everybody thought Kamala needed someone middle the road to kind of help bring the vote. Why would they choose Tim Waltz?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is maybe nobody was willing to run with her. The Pennsylvania governor, whose name escapes me at the moment, is Jewish, and with the leftist outrage against Israel and the support for Palestine, particularly in the swing state of Michigan, where you've got so many Muslims that are living in Michigan. I think that they were afraid of picking him for fear of losing the Muslim vote. We've got a significant Muslim vote in the state of Minnesota as well. I don't know if you saw the results of the election in the state yesterday, our primaries. Ilhan Omar, the leftist politician from Somalia, won her election here again in this state. I mean, these leftists just keep getting elected, and I think that they were a little concerned about that. Now, I can't speak for anybody else that was on Kamala's list. I have no idea what the conversations were, but it is very possible.
To your point,
possible. This is just speculation on my part. It's very possible that Walz is the only one that would do it.
You may very well be right, because our very liberal Sherrod Brown, who's a senator here in Ohio. He was her VP pick when she ran for president, you know, when she was trying to get the nomination, and she was the lowest one on the totem pole, got 0 votes, right? She, which is the other crazy thing, how they're faking this whole thing like she's all of a sudden the most popular person in the world. But interesting, Sherrod Brown, a Democrat here in Ohio, will not campaign now. He was the VP for her if she was going to be, you know, the presidential nominee, but now he won't even go to the DNC convention. He's not going to the convention, and he won't even campaign for her. He's distancing himself, and he's left as she is. And if you live in Ohio, please don't get behind Sherrod Brown. My gosh, Sherrod Brown needs to go down. But anyway, I just want to say you're absolutely right about that. I think, and I don't even know, Dan, if we will end up at the DNC with these two candidates. I still have huge doubts. I believe what they're probably going to do is say, we got to rescue the party. And Michelle Obama, who really doesn't want to run and just really hates to just try, will come and be the hero at the last second. And look at the convention. We have Obama, Clinton's, the lineup.
I have a real hard time swallowing the Michelle Obama pill.
I know.
And the reason for that is, I mean, not that they wouldn't run her out there, but the question is, what qualifies her to be president of the United States?
Wait, Dan, you don't have to be qualified to be a Democrat. You don't have to qualify to run as a Democrat. I mean, is Kamala qualified?
You have a point there.
No.
You have a point there, but they do have to be able to sell it somehow.
They did.
How do we know
2 book
what
tours.
Her capacity is to make decisions? How do we know what her capacity is to be commander?
That doesn't matter, Democrats.
What idea do we have of her capacity to negotiate deals in the legislature?
Right.
She's got no experience, none, zero.
Absolutely.
And are
Absolutely.
we saying that would just be a third?
But she's popular. She's a celebrity.
For Barack? I don't know.
Yeah, Hollywood loves her. She's popular. She had the same 2 book tours Obama had before he ran for office. And she's got the numbers. And that's what they'll probably say. You know, Kamala and Tim, we just don't understand, can't seem to be. But Hillary and Michelle, now let's look at that. I don't know, we'll see, but you see Hillary, Barack Obama, you see the whole lineup. They're going to be the speakers. So I guess, Dan, we'll see what goes on. But I don't see how, of course, Kamala and them, they're spinning, you know, people, they're putting the AI together to make her look like she's got crowds. They're doing all kinds of paying actors to come sit in the audience so that she looks like she's got a huge number of following. And even taking USA Today articles and using them as Google ads and changing the titles to make it look like these magazines are endorsing her, allegedly. These are all bizarre things, and we're out of time. You are brilliant as always, and I look forward to talking. And the day if Michelle ends up being the nominee, come back and let's talk again, because we'll have a lot more to talk. We talk about socialism on steroids, fast track, put them back in charge again. The destruction of America, we've seen it since their presidency, and obviously there were things laid far before that to do this, and games being played. But you're brilliant. Thank you for talking to us about socialism and Tim Walz. So it's safe to say, Dan, that Tim Walz has destroyed Minnesota, and you won't be voting for he and Kamala.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And I want your listeners to go to National Review and check out my article.
Yes, tell us about it. Is
socialism really the same as neighborliness? Go to nationalreview.com, put my name in the search box, and you'll find the article.
Nationalreview.com. Thank you for joining us, Dan. Wow, do you think this ticket can beat Donald Trump? Or will there be another candidate? Let's keep on guard. Let's keep praying. Let's watch. Thanks for joining me today. Like, subscribe, and share this with someone. We'll see you next time. And until then, stay on guard. We'll see you then.